Bulavinaka and welcome to Close Up. It is a known fact that three-quarters of planet Earth is covered with oceans, and for smaller island countries like ours in the Pacific region, importance of oceans cannot be emphasized enough. So last week, some 80 countries from around the world convened at the United States Department of State here in Washington, D.C. to discuss some of the important issues pertaining to oceans. So over the next half an hour, we take a look at some of those important issues and see how it is having an impact on a region like ours. Who better than us in the Pacific region to quite understand the importance of such a vital resource? It covers 140 million square miles, or nearly 71% of the Earth's surface. Put into context, that's more than 97% of planet Earth's water contained in the ocean. Our oceans provide 99% of the planet's living space, the largest space in the universe known to be inhabited by living organisms. And when you relate that to everyday living, more than 3.5 billion people globally depend on ocean for their primary source of food. Now, a recent report by the International Union for the Conservation of Nature (IUCN) found out that more than 10 million Pacific Islanders are dependent on the ocean in one way or the other. The report further states that Pacific Ocean-based fishing and tourism sectors alone inject US $3.3 billion, or just under 6 billion Fijian dollars, to the region's national economies. This equates to more than 10% of the region's gross domestic product. If anything, these statistics give us a fair idea as to why oceans are and should be dear to us. However, these benefits come to us at a cost: the degrading health of our oceans. Three major causes of ocean health degradation are unsustainable fisheries, ocean pollution, and ocean acidification. These are global issues not only faced by smaller island nations like ours, but other regions in the world too. So last month, some 80 nations, from politicians to environmental scientists, from non-government organizations to environment activists, all got together in the United States to discuss these issues at an oceans conference. Taking charge on the issue was none other than the United States, calling on other world leaders to understand the need to protect our oceans.
No one should mistake that the protection of our oceans is a vital international security issue. It's a vital security issue involving the movement of people, the livelihood of people, the capacity of people to exist and live where they live today. The ocean today supports the livelihoods of up to 12% of the world's population. But it is also essential to maintaining the environment in which we all live. It's responsible for recycling things like water, carbon, nutrients throughout our planet, throughout the ecosystem. System is an important word. So that we have air to breathe, water to drink, and it is home to literally millions of species.
It's not just a matter of protecting our oceans, but also that of global food security.
Given that more than 3 billion people, 50% of the people on this planet, in every corner of the world, depend on fish as a significant source of protein. The connection between a healthy ocean and life itself for every single person on Earth cannot be overstated. And we will hear from scientists who will talk about that relationship in the course of the next hours and days. The fact is, we, as human beings, share nothing so completely as the ocean that covers nearly 3/4 of our planet.
The ocean is one resource that every single person on this planet shares. It connects each and every region, country, and people. However, over the years, human activities, greed for money in the exchange of ocean resources, and irresponsibility has led the ocean to the brink of devastation.
And here's the problem. When anybody looks out at the ocean, we're all guilty of it one time or another. When you stand on a beach and you look out at the tide rolling in, We feel somehow that the ocean is larger than life, that it's an endless resource, impossible to destroy. So most people underestimate the enormous damage that we, as human beings, are inflicting on our ocean every single day. When people order seafood from a restaurant, most of the time they don't realize that a third of the world's fish stocks are overexploited. Too much money chasing too few fish. And nearly all the rest are being fished at or near their absolute maximum sustainable level on a planet that has 6 billion people today and will rise to 9 over the next 30, 40, 50 years.
And to make the matters worse, the impacts of climate change is fast taking its impending toll on marine resources. Human impacts on natural ecosystem is playing a huge role too.
They usually don't realize that because of climate change, the basic chemistry of our ocean is changing faster than it has ever changed in the history of the planet. And if it continues much longer, a significant chunk of marine life may simply die out because they no longer live, no longer survive in the ocean's waters. The bottom line is that most people don't realize that if the entire world doesn't come together to try to change course to protect the ocean from unsustainable fishing practices, unprecedented pollution, or the devastating effects of climate change, then we run the risk of fundamentally breaking entire ecosystems.
The life cycle within the ocean is very essential, and health of our oceans largely depend on these life cycles between various underwater organisms. This is where the issue of unsustainable fisheries comes into the picture. Unsustainable harvest of fish stocks is on rise globally, posing a serious threat to the health of our oceans.
One is the issue of overfishing, which is catching too many fish compared to what the fish stock, how fast it can renew itself year after year. Another one is illegal fishing, which takes place mostly in waters with poor governance. And the third issue is that of bycatch, of the unwanted catch or unintended catch of other marine life other than the target species.
It is estimated that each year 70 to 75 million tons of fish is caught throughout the world. Out of this, roughly about 29 million tons of fish are for human consumption. Over the last decade, fish production has increased by as much as 34%.
Some of the fish stocks in the Pacific, for example the skipjack tuna stock, are very large resources, and it's highly exploited, but it's not in an overexploited state. But if the fishing fleets continue to grow, if there are more and more vessels being constructed, then it's likely that the stock can become overfished in the medium term to longer term.
Now, the problem you face with say an island country with its domestic tuna fleet is that if you didn't let any foreign fleets fish, you would have a lot more fish, okay? And your local boats would catch more per day. But your total catch would be far less than if you had big industrial fleets also in your economic zone. So you've got this dilemma of, do you want to protect your local inshore fleet, your local boats, or do you want to maximize how many fish get taken out of your economic zone in the long term? And you can't have both.
So what is it really that is leading to overcapacity and unsustainable fisheries?
One of the main drivers of overfishing and overcapacity is the open access nature of some of these fishery resources, in that anybody pretty much can fish once they obtain a license. So good profits attract more fishers, and more fishers and more profits attract others, until eventually the profits dwindle down and you end up in a situation with a lot of fishing vessels that cost a lot of money and too few fish to catch.
So is there any solution to address the issue of unsustainable fisheries? Well, some experts say an innovative partnership between vessel operators, states and suppliers may be the answer.
This is a project that's being driven by the SPC, the scientists in the Pacific region, that we're helping to fund, and the point is for the fishing vessels and SPC and the national fishing authorities in the region to work collaboratively to put electronic data entry, if you will, on purseine and longline fishing vessels, so that data, the fishing information that's currently being recorded on a paper log can be submitted electronically to the national ministries as well as to the scientists for the region.
Collating scientific data, Jackson says, will help all those associated with fisheries to make informed and thoughtful decisions to manage the resource.
Some countries in the Pacific region have agreed to work with SPC to have their fleets use this technology on board, as well as have their fisheries ministries receive the data electronically. So, for example, in the tuna fisheries in the Western and Central Pacific, all large-scale purse seine vessels have to have an observer on board. And they can't fish on fads for certain periods of the year, and they have information about their catch and their effort that has to be supplied, and there are measures in place for reducing bycatch associated with fishing. So there's a whole suite of measures, from measures that are designed to limit the fishing impact on the stock, to limiting bycatch, to monitoring, control, and surveillance of the fisheries.
It's scenes like these that are very common, not only here in Fiji and the Pacific, but most parts of the world. Plastic cans, bottles, debris, all lying on the beach and in the sea, an eyesore as well as a potential risk to the health of the oceans. Ever wondered what the consequences are of a polluted ocean environment? Well, it is estimated that death and disease caused by polluted coastal waters cost the global economy a staggering $12 billion a year. Plastic waste thrown about in the sea kills close to 1 million seabirds, 100,000 sea mammals, and countless number of fish every year.
Some of this debris is so large we can see it from space by satellite. But actually the most abundant items, the microplastics, some are so small that we need the aid of a microscope to resolve them.
Plastic is the most common debris found in the ocean, approximately 75% of total debris.
Marine debris is harmful. It's damaging to our economies, affecting tourism and reducing the catches of fisheries. The costs of cleanup and of measures to reduce marine debris are substantial, estimated at $500 million on the west coast of the USA alone.
But in the next 10 or 20 years, they are not going to solve it. And what's going to happen if we just keep going and wait for good things to happen in the future is we're going to double the amount of plastic that's currently in the ocean in the next 10, 20 years. That's about 300 to 350 million tons of plastic in the ocean. That comes out to about 1 ton of plastic for every 2 tons of fish, maybe 3 tons of fish. We're not exactly sure how many fish there are.
When you look into the statistics, it's very easy to understand why. In the last 20 years, we've used and consumed more plastic than the entire 20th century. Just think about this and look at this graph for a minute. From about 2 million tons in the 50s to 260 million tons in 2010. This is all plastic that is still here with us on this planet. There's no place to go.
Experts say plastic debris has a direct impact on some 700 species of sea creatures. Out of these 700 species, 10% are already on the brink of extinction.
We look at some specific examples. Seabirds, for example, widely affected through entanglement, ingestion of debris. And for the few species where we have very good population level, we find that the incidence is really quite widespread. Here we see the northern fauna in European waters. Survey data shows that over 95% of some populations of northern fauna contain plastic debris in their guts. They're contaminated with unnecessary plastic items.
Plastic is very lightweight, which makes products extremely easy to litter. Plastic production uses toxic compounds that have no long-term effects on people and animals, effects on the endocrine system. We know about this. And above and beyond that, plastic lasts forever. Whether it's 300 or 400 or 500 years, sort of doesn't matter. None of us will live enough to see it. Yet increasingly, we make single-use and disposable products out of this. Products intended specifically to be thrown away. There is a big problem with plastic products as well. They have no end-of-life plan.
Plastic has, however, over the years become the most used object, and this huge demand is the reason for pollution. So how can this be addressed?
I think we need to, as I said earlier, we need to get also a solution that's at the end of the pipe. The end of the pipe is basically consumers discarding consumables. It's quite simple. And most of these consumers don't do so because they're careless, they do so because they don't have any alternative. They live in industrializing countries where the consumption of plastic is like this, is going up explosively. But the installation of infrastructure is about like this, and you have this enormous gap, and there's no collection, and there's no transport, and there are no bins. The technology to fix this is quite simple, right? It's transport and collection technology, not hard at all. The tough part is how do you install and maintain that technology at scale in a locally appropriate way in an entire country.
The key solution in the long term, although we have to recognise there's no single silver bullet here, it's a question of combining these measures. But in the long term, the key solution has to be to divert that debris away from the oceans. And an effective way of achieving that is to ensure that the items that we produce are designed so that they can be effectively and easily captured via recycling. Not only will this help to reduce the flow of debris to the oceans, it will also help us to capture resource that would otherwise be lost to the environment.
The ocean's ecosystem has its own unique life cycle. Whatever happens at any of those levels of cycle affects the whole environment.
Ocean acidification was first identified as a major problem for coral reefs only 15 years ago. But since that time, there have been hundreds of studies that have showed that important processes like calcification, which is how corals build their skeletons, reproduction of many invertebrates, a whole range of biological processes are changed by ocean acidification.
The amount of acidity in seawater is at an average of 8.2 to 8.1 over the last decade.
Now that doesn't sound like much because it's a logarithmic scale. And when you actually look at the actual numbers there, it's a 26% increase in something called the hydrogen ion, which is what makes water acidic. So it's a massive change. Now if we go into the future, of course, as we pump more CO2 into the atmosphere, we'll be seeing that amount triple or even quadruple. And of course that's got huge implications for biological systems and humans.
What does ocean acidification mean to the largest ocean on the face of the planet?
Australia, the Great Barrier Reef, Fiji and many other countries is a great dependence on the health of coral reefs. This is directly eroding that health. So it's putting at risk our fisheries, our tourism, and if we go to the end of the century, we start to see things like the coastal barriers around islands where we've got the waves breaking on the reefs may disappear. And this will be transformational. So it's not a future we want to go down, because returning from this future takes 10,000 years. That's 300 generations. I don't think we're ready to make that decision.
Pacific Island nations are already being impounded by impacts of climate change, sea level rise and so on. Ocean acidification will just add to those existing problems. Not only is the health of our oceans at risk, but the health of millions of Pacific Islanders too.
We've got sea level rise, we've got impacts on corals through bleaching and so on, we've got ocean acidification. This is all adding up to the perfect storm where we undermine the food and employment of many people throughout the Pacific. So it's an experiment we don't want to go. And there are other problems in other places, like in the polar oceans, you've got big problems as well. So already we know in 15 years this is not a direction we want to go in. And this is why we've got to bring down the emissions of CO2 very rapidly over the next 20 years.
Ocean acidification, pollution and unsustainable fisheries are issues that affect the entire globe. But for the Pacific, these issues are simply not just complex problems.
The Pacific, comprising 34% of the Earth's surface, it's globally significant. But obviously in our region, 2% of that area is land, 98% water. So all of the key issues that affect our region are basically related to ocean or coasts in one way or another.
People's livelihood lies at the heart of the issue here, where millions of Pacific Islanders heavily rely on the ocean.
Through plastics in particular is a real pressing and growing problem in the Pacific. The issue of loss of certain species, particularly the numbers of marine mammals, turtles, whales, dolphins, are at the lowest level in history. So these are major problems for the Pacific. The need for urgent action is basically the call from this conference. In our region there are many positive actions. the president of Kiribati announced the Phoenix Island protected area would be a no-take zone, which is important, but always important to make a balance between conservation of marine resources, the protection of fisheries, sustainable fisheries.
Be it climate change, ocean pollution, acidification or unsustainable fisheries, the Pacific is at the receiving end of these issues with very minimal or negligible contribution.
Most famous area of waste, the Pacific garbage patch, you can look that up on Google, is the largest marine area, floating debris covering kilometres. It's a huge area. That's coming basically from the west coast of the US. So whatever's discarded goes, the currents circulate, they bring it there, so that's not a problem of our making. So there are those problems under our control. I think governments are trying to address them, still challenging. Those that aren't, they require an international approach.
I think it's very important that we bring stories from the Pacific about people losing things, losing their livelihoods. I mean, this is often not presented to people who live in countries that make the greatest emissions. And I think it's, this is an ethical issue. This is not just about this generation, it's about generations that follow, many hundreds of generations. And so I think we've got to step back, we've got to put that political pressure on the countries that are making the most emissions, and we've got to transform the energy systems of the world. That's what we've got to do, and we can do it. There are plenty of options.
One of the major challenges faced by the Pacific is finding the right balance between the economic input of fisheries and the sustainable management of our oceans.
I think what we require is the commitment of governments, and we've seen that. What we need in many of our Pacific countries with limited capacity is support and investment from the international community. What we also need are innovative solutions, so involving the private sector. So Kiribati, for example, since introducing a deposit on drink cans, has basically addressed that issue of removal of the waste from cans, but still there are issues such as plastic which remain.
With climate change, excessive carbon emission, ocean pollution and acidification and many more problems associated with the environment already at the fore, protecting our oceans deserve as much legacy as the former. Which is why the United States has called on all the nations to put in place an energy policy.
There's nothing that we're looking at that doesn't have a solution. Acidification, nitrate overload, dead zones. We have to change the politics. And that's part of the mission that's got to come out of here. So today I want to talk just about a couple of stuff very, very quickly, because each of us are going to sort of lay out some things we can do. But the summary of everything that we're going to hear today is that we have to change the political will and start to make the decisions that put the money into enforcement, into science, into all the things that can actually save the oceans.
Most importantly, what we need is action. Sustained activism and courageous political leadership. We cannot afford to be bystanders in this pre-apocalyptic scenario. We have to become the protagonists in the story of our own planet's salvation. We need to step up now. Now the good news is we can do this together.
Well, there's a whole bunch of options for Fiji and other island nations to join the movement towards low energy systems. One of the issues on islands is actually an economic issue with, so if you go solar on many islands and don't have to drag diesel on there, you get a much cheaper price for electricity than you are getting quite now. So just economically, ignoring this other problem, it's a wise thing to do. So those sort of transformations, I think islands being the forerunner. We've got something like 20,000 habited islands across the planet. These could become systems which, essentially microcosms for the world that are undergoing changes ahead of the curve, almost teaching the world how to do things. And I think there's a whole range of different things that can be done.
I think all countries are taking actions. The challenges and limitations are often relating to capacity, often relating to challenges coming from outside our region.
I'm standing here today as a concerned citizen of this planet who believes that this is the most important issue of our time. My foundation, as Secretary Kerry recently announced, a $3 million grant to the organization Oceanata to support their efforts to protect sharks marine mammals and key ocean habitat in the Pacific. Today, I am here to commit even more of my foundation's resources to this cause. I'm pledging an additional $7 million to meaningful ocean conservation projects over the next 2 years.
At the end of the two-day conference, various countries committed millions of dollars in climate change and ocean conservancy works. How that will trickle down to benefit the region that has no major contribution to these issues is yet to be seen.
Well, that is the show for tonight. For questions or comments, please email us on closeup@fujitv.com.fj. You can also like our Facebook page and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you for joining us. Join us again same time next week. Until then, good evening.